Hey, I'm Michael Dorinda.
And I'm Jake Bennett.
And I'm Jesse.
And welcome to episode number 1 of the Vim Throwdown podcast.
Chicka tenant. Okay, so let's preface here. Last time we were recording not North Meets South. Last time we were recording the Laravel News podcast, we started the show out talking a little bit about Vim. Michael and David Hemphill and TJ Miller had been talking about their Vim configs, and Jesse Leet and Jess Archer were in the chat and their Vimmers, and I was feeling attacked. And so I lashed out a little bit. And so Jesse reached out to me and said, hey, I just, we're friends. I thought I should just let you know, like, that really hurt my feelings. And so, Jesse, this is my official apology on air. I'm sorry I hurt your sensitive nature towards your Vim configs. I'm so sorry.
I don't remember this conversation.
No, it never happened. No, you just said today before we started this, you were like, hey, you're going to apologize on air? I'm like, yep, I'm going to apologize on air. So that was your apology. It was all made up. I'm not sorry at all, actually. I'm doubling down on my Vim hate.
You don't need to apologize.
Yeah, no, I'm seasoned. But it was funny because, so really, David Hemphill was setting up on a new machine, and he's like, I just feel so bad, like, putting PHP Storm on this virgin machine. It's just so pure and clean, and I just don't want to screw it all up with PHP Storm. So Michael and TJ, can you guys help me with my Vim config stuff? And he's like all screwed up. So anyway, basically I give Michael a hard time, of course, but I've seen this dude fly through Vim like a crazy man. And so, really where I'm at is, I told Michael before we started the show, I use Vim on a very regular basis, actually. So I'm in servers a pretty regular amount and using Vim to get around to log files or taking a look through some of the code to see what's currently in there. And even sometimes locally, I'll do it as well. But I don't use it at all, really, for my development. And so the biggest barrier to me has been, I know enough of the movements to kind of make my way through things, but it's never been able to be a fully featured editor because I don't know how to set everything else up. And so I know there's a lot of things you can do to set up, but as I watch David and TJ and Jesse and Jess and all these other folks talk on Twitter or wherever it might be that we're talking, and they're talking about all their Vim config stuff, I get lost so fast. And I've tried a couple times, like I open a vimrc file, or I've copied somebody else's dot files, and I look at it and like immediately I'm overwhelmed, have no idea what it is. So what I would really appreciate, and what I wanted this kind of to be about, is if I could just ask some questions about some of those things, and then you guys could dispense some of your infinite wisdom about Vim and what the best path is, just for me to kind of get started down this rabbit hole. And then maybe we can have future follow-up shows where I've maybe taken some of the things that you guys have talked to me about this show. I spend a little bit of time working on it this week, and then next week I come back with more questions, because there will be more questions. And then I maybe just don't bother you during the week and just save up all my questions for 2 Saturdays from now or something.
Yeah.
It might be fun.
Yeah.
Does that sound reasonable? Awesome. Okay, cool. So that being said, so welcome to the show, Jesse. We're glad to have you on. This is your second or third time on the show. I feel like at least second, maybe third.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to have impromptu guests. It's always cool to be able to just like reach out to somebody and be like, hey, we're recording, do you want to jump on? You're like, yeah, absolutely. Yep, give me 2 seconds, I'll be right there. So that's fun. Okay, rapid fire questions right after I sneeze. Hold on. Hey, you guys got lucky. I'm usually like a 3 sneezer. You know what I mean? You guys, anybody like that? You guys got like a number of sneezes you typically go through before you are done?
One sneeze is okay, but the second one and then the third one's just rude, right? So
yeah. Is that how it goes? Okay.
Both of my kids are like that. They both always 3 times. So
yeah, at least. My mother is she's known for her sneeze. It is more of a scream than a sneeze. I'd have friends come over, like they'd be over after school, and my mom would sneeze, and they'd be like, "Is she okay? Like, is everything okay?" Like, she's like, "Oh!" It's like, what is wrong with this lady? Anyway, okay. So, before we get too far into it, I want to talk just kind of top level, high level, sort of deals. I'm going to assume that somebody who's listening doesn't know what Vim is, And so I'm going to give my best answer, and you guys can kind of fill in the blanks, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So just like we have text editors, Notepad, Sublime, whatever you might have that you've used, Vim is literally at its core, at its root, it's just a text editor. That's all it is, right? You're on a server, and you have, in most instances, like in Linux, and I think on Mac, is Vim pre-installed on Macs? Right,
Yes.
VI.
Yes. Yeah, Vim is definitely installed on Macs. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me start with this real quick while I'm thinking about it. VI versus VIM, because I see people sometimes reference VI or VI and sometimes reference Vim. Is there a difference?
There is. I'll let you take it, Jess.
Okay. I mean, I don't know the exact history, but I think even when you run VI now, I think even on like bare bones Linux servers, am I right, Michael? You're getting like Vim like VI improved.
I mean, I think it depends.
Okay.
I think it depends on the distro. Like some will alias Vi to Vim, some will have like Vi as basically as an alias for Vim. I know that on
so originally it was just VI.
Debian, yeah, Vi was the original thing that was built for like 80 character or 80 column console terminals, and things like that. Vim, as we know it, sort of now is Vi improved. That's what the
Gotcha.
It's the Vi. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I think depending on the distribution, especially in terms of like macOS will ship with a version of Vim installed. Some distributions of Ubuntu will come with Vim as well. I think Debian by default like is Nano maybe on a base install. On an essential install, you can then install Vim Tiny or Vim like the full Vim. So there's different versions of Vim as well. But for most scenarios and what we talk about here, and I think probably as we get into the conversation, we're going to talk more about NeoVim. But Vim Vi improved is sort of the current. So they're at version 8 at the moment.
Okay, so that's where we're at. So it's a text editor at its base, right? That's what it is. And the nice thing is, so the way that you interact with it is you just get into a shell, and then you have access to Vi or to Vim, right? So you type in Vim, and you get this nice, pretty little text editor. So it's not something you have to install. It's just there. It's already installed for you by default. It's already configured to a certain point, all set for you to go. And as Michael mentioned, originally, or sort of like back in its roots, it was for computers back before you even had a mouse, which is if you don't have a mouse, you can't navigate around with a mouse. So what do you have left to navigate with? Your keyboard. So there is different modes that you can be in Vim. I think there is, I know there's insert and visual select mode.
Mm-hmm.
And is the third one just called movement, or what's it called?
Normal, yeah.
Normal. Okay, so you have normal mode.
Those are the main ones. So there's normal, there's insert, and there's visual mode. I think there's two others as well. There's select and replace.
Okay. So if you're normally just in Vim, you pop into Vim, you're going to then use your keyboard to navigate around, up, down, left, right, all that good stuff. And I know that one of the things that hardcore Vimmers are pretty adamant about is you don't use the arrows. You do not use the arrow keys on your keyboard. Now, is that because they didn't have arrow keys on keyboards back then? Or is it just because you're not hardcore if you use the arrows? Because the whole idea, and I'm getting a little bit off track, but the whole idea behind some of this is efficiency, right? That is a big reason why people use Vim is it's like you don't even have to take your fingers off the home row. You can navigate around up, down, left, right using JKL and semicolon, right? You don't have to move your fingers off those rows, off those keys to get around. So tell me the thing with the arrows. What is that? Is that just a hardcore Vimmer thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think, so the arrow movement that Vimmers use is like HJKL. So technically you have to move your one finger over.
Oh, sorry, HJKL.
To go left.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was the first blasphemy, but I mean, we'll move on.
It won't be the last, I promise. You'll have plenty of opportunity.
To be super clear, like, I love the editor wars, and this is like fun to banter, but I mean, use what you love, right? Like for years, I just used, Sublime and Atom and was super happy over there, and then ended up moving to Terminal Vim kind of as a lot of people were moving over to VS Code. That was when I switched over. And but I had been using like Vim emulators in Sublime and Atom for quite a while. And And yeah, I don't know the history behind the arrow keys to answer that question. I just know that like, yeah, there is an efficiency thing. Like, for example, your most important keys are your kind of your arrows and your escape key to go back to normal mode. And a lot of people rebind escape to something closer just because everyone hates reaching for escape. And I think it's probably the same with arrows. I don't know about the history of the arrow keys, but it is like efficient because it is right on your home row, like you said. So
Gotcha. Okay, so at its core, that's Vim, right? So you've got Vim. It's that was a tiny bit of its history too. So it's pre-installed. It's a text editor, and one of the unique things about it is that you move around without using your mouse. Some iterations later you can use your mouse if you choose to, I think, but that's kind of at the base what Vim is. So one of the things that a lot of things we have available to us now. We have Sublime, we have VS Code, we have PHP Storm, we have all these IDEs. And each of those IDEs, as far as I know, most of them also have modes where you can say, I want to have Vim bindings inside of these editors. So like in PHP Storm, you can say, I want to use Vim movements inside of PHP Storm or in VS Code or in Sublime, right? So for you guys in particular, even though those are there, what is for you guys the attractiveness of why you would want to use Vim over something like, say, Sublime? What is it that makes you say, I would rather use just plain Vim in the terminal rather than one of those tools?
Well, I mean, for me, I grew up. I started my very first programming job was on servers. There was like no GUIs. So I was kind of forced to develop in Vim, and it always looked cool. And I don't think anyone who has seen somebody working in Vim. I don't think if you've ever seen someone who's proficient with Vim using Vim, you don't think, damn, that's cool, because you just fly around the keyboard. And so as a young, impressionable, just starting to program person, that was something that was really cool to me. And it's like, well, if I could get efficient in that, it would always look cool. And people would look at me in the future and it'd look cool. But, and I'm the same as Jesse. I went from originally Vim. I then went to, NetBeans and the old like pre-PHP Storm days with those IDEs and that kind of stuff. And then I tried Atom and I tried Sublime Text and I tried PHP Storm, and Sublime and PHP Storm, I had the bindings. Idea Vim and whatever the Vim plugin is for Sublime Text, but they were never really sort of feature complete in terms of, there were always things that you could do in Vim with natural bindings and the natural keyboard sort of interaction. They just didn't work correctly in any of those implementations. And a lot of that has changed now with NeoVim in the way that NeoVim is built, and you can kind of run NeoVim itself as an extension in VS Code. I've never done it myself, but I've seen that that's something that, that's kind of one of the cores, is that you can embed NeoVim into other places and use it as a native kind of extension to those things. So, but it was always like, it's always the slant on PHP Storm is that it uses so much memory and that it's like a memory hog and it's slow and it's all this kind of stuff. The thing for me, and people say you spend a lot of time configuring Vim if you're going to use it, and you need to do this, you need to do that. I find that with Vim, it's always an additive thing. You're always adding things as you need them. It's a just-in-time kind of configuration. Whereas, Caleb Porzio's got the course on VS Code, where the default VS Code does a lot of stuff, but you start turning off a lot of that stuff. You start turning off the sidebar, the keyboard, the what do you call it? The directory tree thing.
Yeah, sure.
You turn that off. You turn off all of the status bars and the tab bars and all of this kind of stuff. So you're turning a lot of things off to get to a point where you have this nice, clean, clear editor where, Vim is where you start with that. So where everything else is kind of reductive and you're taking things away, with Vim, you're adding things as and when you need them. And for us as
that's
PHP
a really interesting
developers,
perspective. Yeah.
For us as PHP developers, you can use PHP Storm and you're just ready to go. But it's a clunky UI. There's a lot of stuff in there added over a lot of time, and you end up like trying to figure out how to turn things off and getting rid of things. And Jeffrey's done a course on Laracast of the same thing. But it's also very good for polyglot programmers, where you've got Vim and it will do everything for you. You know, you can use it for PHP one day. I know that there's quite a lot of people in the community. Dale Reese popped up the other day, and you know he's been quiet in PHP for a long time because he's doing stuff in Go. So, you know, you can tell Vim, hey, I want to have, when I open a Go file, I want it to do these things. And so you've got a Go language server and it's doing, you know, whatever linting and whatever stuff for Go, but then you can switch to PHP the next day or Ruby and all of that kind of stuff. And you can add it as and when you need it without having to go, all right, well, I'm using PHP Storm today, and then I'm using WebStorm, and then I'm using, you know, PyCharm if I'm working with Python and things like that. So it's kind of that multi-purpose tool that kind of does it all. And it's moving in the direction now where, you know, Microsoft spent however many millions of dollars on VS Code, and they came up with the language server protocol, which is then portable to all the editors. And then the NeoVim team have then built that in as a native integration into NeoVim, so that it then supports all of those language server clients. And then
I want to talk about that in a minute. Yeah, the NeoVim idea. I want to talk about that in a second too. Before I jump too far ahead with that, Jesse, is there anything that Michael didn't mention that you sort of would say, this is the particular reason why I use Vim full-time rather than one of those other editors?
Yeah, he nailed a lot of stuff that I would have said. Like, I think it's a really interesting perspective too, what you say about being reductive and whereas Vim being like an additive thing. That's totally the case. Like, that's bang on. You know, a lot of people want to open up their editor and just have everything ready to go. And that's why PHP Storm is so awesome in ways, right? So anybody can kind of jump in and have like a fully fleshed out environment and lots of intelligence there. And it's really cool refactoring tools and everything, right? And with Vim, you can add a lot of that back in, if not all of it. It's additive though. You got to install plugins and all that kind of stuff. And you got to hunt, you got to like to configure. You got to enjoy that side of it as well. But I would say just like along the lines of that enjoyment, like if you were to say like, why would I use Vim over these other editors? For me, it's just like back when I used Sublime and Atom, and I mean, yeah, you mentioned older editors like Front Page 2000. But back when I used, yeah, exactly. Back when I used those editors, if I wanted to, like, let's just say I couldn't find a plugin for something and I wanted a feature. Even in Sublime, I had messed around with like, you know, maybe it'd be cool to build a Sublime plugin, and maybe I wasn't capable enough at the time, but same thing with Atom too. It's like you really got to dig into a lot of like JavaScript APIs, and the community isn't really based around like teaching people how to build plugins. Whereas Vim, like that's what it's all about. It's all about writing your own Vim script functions or your own Lua functions. We'll get to NeoVim in a bit, but so like so many times, like as an example, you know, language intelligence, or like with the LSP, you can import classes and all that, right? So in PHP, I can import a class, but in Laravel, you can have real-time facades where you want to prefix that import with facade. And so I found it really kind of tedious to have to go all the way out to the top of the file and prefix with facade, because that's like a framework-specific thing. So in another editor, I'm just kind of like, unless I can find an Artisan or a Laravel plugin for that, I'm kind of out of luck. Whereas with Vim, it was like, I'll just spend 15 minutes, I'll quickly go write a Vim script mapping so that I can just like, as long as my cursor's over top of that class, I can convert the import to a real-time facade, for example. And it's just so, I guess like the word is hackable. Like it's the most hackable text editor in a way, right? And it's built that way too. So the whole community is about like teaching, you know, how to like, here's a plugin, here's how to override everything in these plugins, and here's how to write your own functions and your own everything. So yeah.
So some of the things I heard you guys say, like, that is interesting to me is that, you know, it's a lot of it is, and this is why we love the Laravel community as well, is this is why we love using Laravel as well, is because the community is so vibrant and so awesome, right? And it sounds like Vim is similar. And that was actually one of the questions I was going to have later on. It's like, what's the community like? I have no idea. I've never been in Vim land for anything, right? But it sounds like it's definitely like a community slanted towards learning. I mean, if I had $1 for every time I saw somebody making a new Vim adventure thing to teach people the movements for how to use Vim, right? I mean, there's just all these people that are really like invested in getting people onboarded. And so, yeah, that's really interesting. Okay. I want to jump over to this idea and we're gonna talk later about plugins and how we get all that stuff installed and everything. What Michael had said, which I would kind of want to jump to for those of you who have not used Vim very much, but literally when you start, that is all it is. You get in and it says, what do you want to do? And you can say like explore, and that gives you like a file tree, and you can just move through the file tree. When you press enter on a file, there's no file lines, there's no highlight, it's just text. That's it, right? And so what you said was like people really, they open an editor and it's so great, and then you have to remove all the crap that you don't want. So it's like doesn't look like somebody threw up all over your screen, right? And that's why I actually didn't go to PHP Storm for so long. It's because like it just looks terrible. And then Jeffrey came out with that PHP Storm for hackers. I can't remember what it was called. It's not for hackers. It's like make PHP Storm awesome or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was when I first switched over to PHP Storm. I was like, oh, okay, I think I can get around this. Because I'm a minimalist at heart, and I really love I really love a clean looking editor. So totally get that. Okay, so let's talk about like these different flavors of Vim. So we have Vi, which was the original one. We have Vim, which is Vi improved. You've mentioned Neo Vim. Is there also something called like Macvim or something like that? What are the different sort of flavors? What are you guys using? Are you using the Vim that just comes with the computer, or sounds like maybe you're using something called Neo Vim? Can you help me understand kind of what these are?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time I was just Vim because it came with Mac OS, but I would always do a brew install to get the latest version and override the Mac OS shipping one. And I'd heard about NeoVim for a long time. I'm like, what's that? This is all working fine for me, and I didn't really have much interest in any of the deeper sort of configuration or hacking on the editor. I was content with plugins that were available and things like that. But Jose Soto and Jesse and Jess Archer have all been on the NeoVim train for a long time, and the more I got into it, the more I started looking at it, the more I kind of picked up on some of the better aspects of it. The community is something that's really big. Bramvim, as it's called, so the one that was written by, I don't know if it's as it's called, but certainly what Jesse calls it a lot. The version written
Did you call it Brandvim?
Bram, B-R-A-M.
Bram.
A-M. So he's Bram van Ulenar. I apologize.
Yeah, Bram Mulinar or something.
Bram, yeah. So he was the creator of Vi Improved. So whereas NeoVim is more of a, so Vim itself does have a community of contributors, but the way that it kind of handles those contributions is that Bram will take all of those contributions and sort of bring them in himself. So if you look at the commit history for Vim, everything is by Bram. And he's the
benevolent dictator.
Right. And so I think when you open just vanilla Vim, it will say like, Bram Mulinar et al. And contributors or something like that as the creator. Whereas NeoVim is a much more sort of traditional, as we've come to know, open source project where there's lots of contributors and they all appear in the contribution graph and the commits are all there. And it just seems like there's a lot more activity around sort of that aspect of it. And there's, people like TJ DeVries and the Primogen, who that's all we know him as, although I know he and I share a name. So, there's people like that are constantly out there that are always kind of building in public, that are sharing off, different plugins and different aspects of the community. So it's always interesting to see that kind of thing. And it's something that we're kind of very used to in the Laravel community, that people are always building in the open and they're always sharing and they're always sort of embracing that aspect of like teaching in the moment that you're learning it. And so it's just a much more engaging community, even outside of, me actually doing any plugins myself. I know that Jesse spends a lot of time in Lua files and getting into the nitty gritty of it. Whereas I just find it a much nicer experience. It's certainly like you feel part of NeoVim, whereas Vim you kind of just use.
Sure. Okay, so it's just a branch. So NeoVim is just a branch of Bramvim, is what you're going to call it.
It's a fork, yeah.
A fork. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So
not a branch, a fork.
It's a fork of Vim. It sort of supports Vim script and the Vim language and all of that, but it's written in Lua. So it's a much like it's written with a real language that you can that you can extend with and make your own configuration with and build your own extensions and plugins and things like that with. They're kind of diverging now in the same way that MySQL and MariaDB kind of are starting to diverge. There's no guarantees that in the future, like when Vim 9 comes out, that it will continue to be compatible with NeoVim. And that's like not a knock on either of the projects. It's just different directions for those two projects. So yeah.
So you'd install that with Brew as well. So NeoVim, you'd just install it with Brew just like you would.
Yep.
And then you just alias it to, when you type Vim, you just open NeoVim instead.
Yep.
Okay. And so I'm
to add to that, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
So yeah, and so Mike was talking about the Lua stuff, and for me, as the the guy who was always tinkering and writing stuff, plugins and little functions and stuff like that. So it's actually written in C. Like it is like pretty low level stuff, but then it's all extendable via Lua. So you can still, it's all at, like Michael said, it's all backwards compatible with Vim at the moment, but Vim 9, when it comes out, has a new like Vim 9 script. And it's basically, he's kind of written a newer proprietary language to kind of build on top of what's already there. And there's no guarantees that NeoVim is going to be backwards compatible with all of that. But the cool thing about NeoVim is that it is like Mike said, a standard language that you can pull in other Lua libs and all that kind of stuff. You find a cool Lua snippet on Stack Overflow and you can copy and paste it into your function. So yeah, it is just kind of that, again, that hackable open source mindset. It really carries through with
specifically, you mean?
Yeah, I'm talking NeoVim specifically.
So help me understand with BramVim. Is it okay if I call it BramVim, or is that just a better way to explain it other than just saying Vim, because Vim is almost like a generic term now, right?
Yeah.
So we'll just call it BramVim, right? Okay. So you said that's written in like Vim script or Vim language. What is that?
Well, both of them are written in C, I think.
They're both written in C. Okay.
Yeah, it's just that when you're they're both scriptable, like by the end user.
Okay, sure.
Like by us in either Vim script or Lua. And so BramVim is all scriptable in Vim script only. Whereas NeoVim at the moment is backwards compatible with Vim script, and it's scriptable with Lua. Now there are people that like do really weird things, like they'll write Python-based plugins or Go-based plugins, but then it just adds extra dependencies. So when someone installs your plugin, they have to have
or something.
Yeah. So out of the box, it's like NeoVim is all of that plus Lua, and yeah.
So you're saying that like Lua is an actual language, is what you said, whereas like Vim script is just a script sort of deal, right? Is it not like
Lua is used
go ahead.
Lua is used in some like machine code stuff, or like if you're into or like a lot of indie game jams and stuff like that will run Lua, or like little hobby projects might be Lua based. Like Lua is an older language that I don't know if it's how old it is, but like it's a standard language before NeoVim that existed. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So one other one. Have you guys ever heard of Macvim? Is that a thing? Or am I dreaming something up?
No, that's a thing. It's basically just as I understand it, a GUI wrapper around Vim. So you can run it as a sort of native application.
So if you haven't like set up your, like if you're still using like Mac console instead of like iTerm or something like that, and you just want to have like a standalone application that just wraps around Vim, you just run Macvim. Okay.
Yep.
But it's not on the same page really as NeoVim. It's just a wrapper. Okay. All right. I'm taking some good notes here, guys. So I'll be have some show notes for us at the end, Michael, instead of you having to make some. So that might be handy. Okay. Just a wrapper around Vim. All right. So I'm
not sure.
Yes.
Sorry, Mike. If with Macvim, I don't think you can exit out to the terminal either. Like you could use the terminal in Vim, but you can't exit out.
No, because it opens its own sort of environment. So you open Macvim and it's straight into Vim. If you exit, then it closes the application. So you can use command mode and things like that to run commands. Whatever you need to do. But it's closed. It's closed.
Okay.
Yeah, and Vim and NeoVim have like a built-in terminal, so you could technically do the inception thing and go like open Vim, open a terminal in Vim, then open Vim in the terminal, and just kind of keep going down the rabbit hole. But yeah.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. So yeah, because typically you're just gonna open NeoVim from from your iTerm or something like that.
Yeah.
So like typically, how do you get into Vim when you're going to open a project? You just go like you open iTerm, you like hyper jump to like whatever directory you're going to be working in, and then just Vim, and then just open it up there.
Basically,
Vim dot slash something like that.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. And then what you're saying is inside of NeoVim has its own like terminal you can open up, like so in a different window, right? Similar to like on PHP Storm, you have like you can open up a console like a Bash or a ZSR, whatever it is, Z shell in a window down there. You're saying NeoVim has the same thing.
It does, yeah. But both Michael and I are using Tmux, so I mean, there's so much.
Which I use Tmux as well.
There's so many options and so much overlap. But yeah, for the people who aren't using Tmux and maybe they just want a quick little like one pane in Vim. In Vim they call those windows. So one pane. Okay. They might want to have a little terminal in the corner. Then you could do that without something like Tmux. But yeah.
We will come back to Tmux too for people who don't know what Tmux is, because I didn't know what Tmux was until not too long ago. I think Michael told me what Tmux was, and I'm in love with it now. So we will come back to Tmux. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about movements or chords. I've caught talking about it as chords a little bit just because I think it makes a good parallel to like what advantage it has. But just to kind of give an outline of what I'd like to talk about before we wrap up the show, because we're at 31, which we got plenty of time. I want to talk about some of these movements and some of like the advantages you get from keyboard navigation as opposed to mouse navigation. And then where I wanted to move to after that is some common things that I don't know how to do in Vim that I would like for you guys to help me understand how I could get some of these features that I'm looking for. And we're just talking about simple ones, but just some features that I would love to be able to have in Vim that I don't currently have set up. And you guys can kind of point me in the right direction for how to do some of those things. Does that sound reasonable?
Sounds good.
Okay. So we have the different modes. We have normal mode, which again is basically you're just navigating through your file using those HJKL, right? Up, down, left, right. And then you have, in addition to that, you have these special shortcuts, right? So like W jumps you forward a word, right? And B jumps you backwards a word, and like $ gets you to the end of a line, and 0 gets you to the beginning of a line. And if you press O, you get something, you get a new line below. And if you press uppercase O, you get a new line above or whatever. So there's all these interesting keyboard shortcuts that you have that when I remember I went from, so my journey was a little bit different than yours, Michael. You said you started sort of in the terminal. You were working on servers, right? For me, I was like on a Windows XP machine, and I remember I used Notepad. That's all I had, like Notepad. I didn't know there was anything else out there. And then it was like Notepad++ was like, blow my mind. This is incredible. Like there's like syntax highlighting. What is this magic? And so that was incredible, but I didn't have any sort of keyboard shortcuts in Notepad++. I knew nothing about any of that stuff. And then Sublime came along, and the whole multi-cursor thing blew my mind. So I was like, no way, this is incredible. I can have like a cursor on different lines, and like this is so much faster. And then Vim came along, and I'm like, yeah, too much. I'm drowning in this amazingness, right? But there's these different keyboard shortcuts. And then in addition to that, I wanted to talk a little bit about bindings as well, because you can set up your own stuff, right? So those are sort of the two things I wanted to focus on. So what are some of the I know there are a bunch of different sort of courses that help you to learn some of the basic, and are we going to call them movements? Is that the correct word for it? Is a movement?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
I think it's we should set a baseline here. First of all, that it's a language. They're not sort of shortcuts. And I think if you're gonna look into anything, that's something that you need to understand. And yes, that there are movements, and the movements that you can carry out in different operating modes. So we talked about those at the start: normal mode, insert mode, visual mode, replace mode, select mode. In terms of key bindings, they're useful for sort of shortcutting things that you do all the time. Vim has this notion of buffers. So every file that you open goes into a new buffer. If you close a file, it moves out of the active buffer, but it's still there. So if you think in terms of like PHP Storm or Sublime, if you open a file in a new tab, it's there. If you close the tab, it's gone.
It's gone, yep.
In Vim, it remains open in the buffer. So you could then
Interesting.
switch to that buffer, go back and continue editing as though the file was open the whole time. But the cool thing about that is that you have persistent undo for that Vim session. So you could go, oh no, I have messed up. I'm not using Git for whatever. So you just go and hit undo a few times until you get back to a working state. So that's really useful. But if you're doing that a lot, if you go into the buffer list, well, to go to the buffer list, you have to leave insert mode, go to normal mode, hit command, go buffer list, enter. That'll open up the list of open buffers, go and find the one that you want. That's a lot of typing. And it's no different in Storm. You can use the command palette to go and open a file, but you open the file again. Whereas buffers, you might have, your test open and your route, your routes file and your controller and whatever. And so you can just jump around between them quite easily. So something that I do a lot is that I have my leader key. So the leader key is what's used to sort of prefix all of your key bindings. So I'd go leader B, and that would open up a picker that shows me all of my open buffers, and then I can just go back to that file and continue editing. If I'm finished on a piece of work, well, I've got 6 or 7 different files in my buffer list. I've got another key binding set up that'll go and just like close all of those or delete those buffers or destroy them. It's called. So the key bindings are good for things that you do often, but are there's a lot of keystrokes involved in it. So it's Vim golf essentially. You want to hit as few characters as possible, without hitting all those characters. And so a lot of it just comes down to sort of just getting used to it. It's muscle memory effectively. I use a lot of mnemonics for my stuff. So I want to buffer destroy BD. I want to buffer destroy all BDA. That kind of stuff. Control P is portable. If I hit Control P, it'll open up my file list. All those kinds of things. If I want to find and buffer, it's leader FB. If I want to search through things, I want to do a regex, well, it's leader R. All of this kind of stuff.
What's leader? So you say that a couple times. Like, is that like a super key?
Yeah, it's essentially your prefix. So before any of these key bindings, you would have a leader. So I don't even.
And when you say leader, I'm trying to make sure I understand what you're saying. Is it Leader? Leader,
yeah.
Okay.
And so you can map it to whatever you want. I use comma. I know that Jesse, I think you use space, right?
Yep.
I don't know. It's been so long. I don't know what the default is in Vim.
I'm not sure if there even is a default. Maybe there is. Okay. I'm not sure.
And that's only when you're in normal mode, right?
Yeah.
No. So you have to be in normal mode.
No,
sort of.
No. Yeah.
It depends on how you set your bindings up. You can set up your bindings such that you can use them in insert mode or in visual mode or whatever. You can have the same one mapped in
But like Jesse wouldn't want space mapped in insert mode as a leader key, right?
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
because if you're in, just to be clear for people who are listening, so like if you were in insert mode and you've not used Vim before, if you're in insert mode and you press space, you would expect that to be space, right? It's going to do space. So if you had a leader key like that, so like earlier Michael said like undo, right? And if you're in normal mode, that's U for undo. But if you're in insert mode, U is just going to insert a U. That's what it's doing, right?
Yeah.
And then one other thing real quick, when you were talking about those buffers, to me in my brain, that's just like open tabs, right? Like if I have tabs along the top of my stuff, that's just open tabs, right? Essentially, that's what that is. All those buffers are just open tabs. Now they're open in the background. They haven't been saved. They're modified. They're sitting there waiting for me to come back to, or to save them, or to close and don't save sort of deal. Okay. Jesse, back to leaders. So you're talking about key bindings and leaders in different modes.
So you bring up the insert mode thing, and insert mode is kind of the odd sheep because that's the one mode where you don't really use your leader. But like so normal and visual mode being the two main other modes. I think there's like Michael said, there's others too, but less used. So you've got your normal mode and your visual mode, and you can have totally separate leader mappings for both of those modes. So my leader R in normal mode could be my prefix for running tests, right? So I usually do like leader R N, so RN for like run nearest test to my cursor. So it just runs the nearest test method, or leader RL for run the last test. Let's say I'm in my implementation and I don't even have my test on the screen. I can space RL to run my last test. But then when I'm in visual mode, leader R could be something totally different, like replace this line with something else, like R for replace. So the leader can be reused across modes, but it's in insert mode, it's not really a thing.
That makes sense. Okay, that helps me a lot. Yeah.
Jesse and I have bindings that do the same thing, but for him it's leader RN, but for me it's leader TN. So I test nearest. I've got TF for test file, TA for test all, TL for test last. So this is where it comes down to, and we were talking about this on the Vim Discord that we've got, the Vim support group. Those kind of things I say deeply personal. Everyone's got their own mnemonic devices and their own approaches to things and their own things that work for them, and that's the same. PHP Storm works for some people, Vim works for others, VS Code works for others. So everyone's got the thing that works for them. And I think the key to it, especially if you're starting out, is you can consume a lot of other people's dot files. I've got mine shared, Jesse's got his shared, like heaps of people share the dot files, mostly for, I've got a new machine, I just want to get it spun up very quickly, but we keep these curated actively. And so we're always looking at each other's and other people's and adding and changing. And, you might have something that works for you, but you might see something else that in someone else's dot files that kind of, oh yeah, actually that makes more sense to me. I hadn't thought of it that way. And so looking at other people's is a good way to get started, but it's a terrible way, in my opinion, to like cultivate something that works for you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right. It's because like you said, like the whole idea of Vim being additive, right? So I think that was the problem for me is I'm like downloading somebody's Vim RC file. I have no idea what any of this means. And it's like, I'm having to strip back anything that I don't understand so I can just get it to work. And it's like, no. The better way to do it is to start very vanilla and then build it up as you learn it. Right. Yeah. So like,
the legendary T-Pope, Tim Pope is like a really well-known Vim creator or Vim plugin creator. He publishes his dot files as well. And I've learned a bunch of cool stuff from there. But like right on his GitHub repo, it's just like, I think right in the description of his dot files repo, it says something like for T-Pope only, don't use. Because the idea is, you're not supposed to clone someone else's setup down. The idea is you're supposed to like you said, add, when you need something, when you feel like you need something, as you need it, you add it. And if you need to, looking for inspiration in someone's dot files is one thing, but it is deeply personal. So.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so a couple things. Yes, so we have these leaders, and leaders can be different depending on which mode you're in, and you can set it to be whatever you want. So one thing that I'm used to doing, and I'm jumping a little bit ahead here because this is kind of what I wanted to talk about later, which is how do I accomplish some of these particular things. So I'm being a little bit more specific than what I'd like to be. But, in Sublime and in VS Code and in PHP Storm, there's no such thing as different modes, right? And so what you end up doing is these key combinations, you almost use leaders, if you will, to sort of tell the keyboard, hey, I'm not doing a normal action here, right? So something like Command Shift is a very common almost leader, if you will, to say, I am wanting to perform an action here. So like if I want to duplicate a line, I'm pressing Command Shift D, right? So again, like in PHP Storm and Sublime, I'm not changing modes. I'm just basically saying I'm always in insert mode when I'm in Sublime. But when I press these particular combinations, it's like I'm getting ready to tell you I'm going to do an action, not an insert, right? So like Command Shift D does a duplicate line. So typically for you guys, like, is that something you would say in insert mode to do? Or do you guys pop out of insert mode into normal mode and then execute some command? Is that what you call it? Movement command? I don't know, what would you call it? Key binding? Whatever. To duplicate a line. Like what does that look like for you? Do you press escape real quick? You press YY to yank, and then I don't know. How do you guys typically do that?
I think for a lot of that stuff you get fairly comfortable fairly quickly, or you sort of need to get fairly comfortable fairly quickly to jump in and out of modes. And I have had caps like there was the big hubbub around the touch bar Macs that didn't come with an escape key, and everyone's like, the escape. No one uses the escape key really.
So to change out of modes, and what we're talking about, and you talked about a little this earlier, Jesse, to pop out of normal mode or to pop out of insert mode, it's escape, right?
Hit escape
typically by default to get back to normal mode.
Correct. Yeah. And so
But a lot
You're
of-
saying nobody
lot
does
of
that.
us-
Who uses Vim on a daily? Nobody uses Escape to do
Well,
that. Is what you're saying.
they would, but there's a whole school of thought. There's I think two main schools of thought. There's those of us like me who remap the caps lock key to escape because I'm never using caps lock. Like it's very rare that I'm going to want caps lock. And then there's another school of thought which I think Jesse you subscribe to, which is use like JJ. Is that right? JK?
So I use I use both actually. So I use I use JK because JJ is like one finger. If it's JK, you can roll. So it's just kind of nicer. But if you hit, and when you're in insert mode, there's no like English word. Maybe in another language this is a problem, but there's no English word that really has the letters JK in a row. So if you type JK in a row, it exits you as if you had escaped. Exits you back to exits insert mode back to normal mode. But I kind of want to get away from that because I'm doing the caps as escape thing too. I still have JK bound just because it's such an old habit I've been doing for like 6 or 7 years, ever since I was using like the Sublime editors and everything. But yeah, he's totally right. Like when the MacBooks didn't have the escape key, to me it was the same thing. It's like a big deal because like none of us want to reach up there anyway. So
yeah, right. It is like let's say your pinky's gonna fall off as many times as you jump between modes. So you said JJ or JK is what you were using, and now you're just saying, I'll just go back to caps lock. So I actually have to use caps lock, which is insane, but I'd have to for some of the stuff for my job. Like there are particular things where they can only, I mean, it sounds wild, but they always write in all caps in this one particular application. You have to write in all caps, and so I need the caps lock.
Some people actually remap caps in different ways where they like triple tap shift to enable caps. They do stuff like that.
Oh, interesting.
I've heard of people where if you like hold left and right shift together, then that can trigger caps.
Oh, that's
so
a cool
your caps.
idea.
So your caps key becomes your escape, but there's still other ways of entering caps if you want to do that.
So now, real quickly, I'm sorry, Jesse, I keep interrupting you. You might learn about me eventually. I am only able to keep a couple things in my brain at a time because my brain's going 10 directions at once. So I'm going to write my thought down, and so you can continue your thought if you can manage to remember where you were at. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I guess the only other thing I would add is just to sort of extend what you had said is you had asked, would you jump out to normal mode or would you make an insert mode mapping for that? And I think it just really depends on what it is. So for example, I don't have very many insert mode mappings, but a real common one that I really like is as your editor adds like bracket pairs or like quote pairs when you're like typing out PHP arrays and stuff. Often I'll want to go to the end, add a comma, and then go to the next line. Like I'm building out an array or an object. And so, one of my favorite insert mode mappings is where I can, in insert mode, I just double tap comma. And what it'll do is it'll go into normal mode for me. It'll go to the end of the line. It'll put the comma in and then go back to insert mode so I can just keep typing. So it kind of just cool. It kind of just does all that for me. And because you never like need to double tap comma. And same thing with semicolon. If I double tap semicolon from the middle of a line, it'll automatically append a semicolon to the end of the statement. And then just leave my cursor there for me. But what you had said was, do you just go back out to normal mode? And I realize for like non-Vimmers, that's sort of a mindset thing. But I think for us Vimmers, we kind of are like our regular mode is always normal mode. The only time you ever go into insert mode is when you're briefly typing something, which as programmers, you're just typing something here and there, right? And then you're navigating code way more than you're typing usually. So you go into insert mode, you type the thing, and as soon as you're done typing, it's like habit. You hit escape, you're back to normal mode. You don't even think about it.
Yeah.
You don't really stay in insert mode. You don't navigate code in insert mode. So it's like you type your thing, you get out. And so then from there, if you said like, oh, I want to move this line down or I want to copy the line, like you're already in normal mode at that point because your habit just brought you back to normal mode. It was a habit. So
yeah, I'm writing this down.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Vimmers are always in normal mode by default.
That's right. We're all normal by default. Trust me. It's because it's just instinct. You finish typing what you're typing and you hit escape, and then you stop and you think like, what am I going to do next, kind of thing.
Exactly.
And so it's we're never going to normal mode.
So it's like right.
Normal mode.
That makes sense. That makes more sense.
When you open Vim, you start in normal mode, right?
Correct.
So,
true story.
You open a file. You're still in normal mode. You go into insert mode to do something, and then you come out of it again. So normal, as Jesse points out, that's the default state.
Okay. I want to follow one thread that you guys brought up a little bit here. One of the nice things about having, well, I don't know, one of the nice things and maybe one of the overwhelming things is it's set up exactly how you want, but there are so many settings. And so one of the things I'm curious about is when you said like I map caps lock to escape, or I have JJ or JK, whatever. So, or somebody hits triple shift. So that's not something you're mapping in Vim. That's like a OS binding, I'm guessing, right? If you're mapping caps lock to escape.
Yep. So that's
is that
just
in Vim or is that in the OS?
No. So that's just built into Mac OS. If you go into your system preferences keyboard, you can modify, you can change the modifier keys.
So you're not having to install something to do that. You're not installing like Carabiner or anything like that.
No. So I did for a long time just use the Mac OS preferences. I use Carabiner now, and that's mainly because I map tapping caps lock to escape. But if I hold caps lock, then that becomes like a super key, which is a combination of Control, Shift, Option, and Command, which is not something like if you're trying to contort your hand, it's like that claw kind of thing to do that. But nothing.
It's like when you're trying to take a screenshot.
Right. So nothing in Mac OS is like using those things. So it unlocks a whole new world of key bindings where I'm using that in Carabiner in conjunction with like Better Touch Tool to go like caps lock held plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will then go to desktop 1, desktop 2, desktop 3, desktop 4, desktop 5. And I tweeted about this last week or the week before about, using a single screen and how I like do that effectively. And, people often have like 2 screens or 3 screens, or they've got like a portrait one and they've got a landscape screen and then they've got a portrait one next to it because they're doing all this kind of stuff. And people that are using like their MacBooks, it's like, it's for music. I'm like, well, I listen to music with my ears. I don't need to look at it to see the music kind of thing. So
what about those sweet Winamp visualizers?
that's right. All of that kind of stuff. And this is something that like when you get deep in the weeds of using Vim, and I've been doing it for, when did I start programming? 2005. So a long time now. It'll be 17 years in July that I've been programming. So you kind of do these things over time that help you be efficient. And that's different for everyone. For me, it means using Tmux and Vim and staying in the terminal 90% of the time, which is aided in my new job by the fact that I'm predominantly working on an open API and building an API. So I don't really need to leave the terminal ever. I've got MySQL in the terminal, I've got tests in the terminal, I've got Git in the terminal. So I just stay in this one place. And then every now and then I have to pop out to check my email or whatever else or messages. So it's just like a mindset thing over all this time that you try and drive the efficiency that works for you. And that really is what, Vim and its key bindings and its additive configuration nature are all about. It's like honing it to what you need. And you hone your skills and you hone your tools and you come to whatever works for you, really, at the end of the day.
Now, Jesse, I'm gonna come back to you, Jesse, real quick. So like, because you had said you mapped JJ or JK, that's something that's just done in Vim then, I'm guessing, right? So it's not like Vim can't map something other than escape to get you out of normal or instant mode into normal mode, right? So is that something you can just map up in Vim?
Yeah, totally. So my JK mapping to go out to leave and go back to normal mode is a Vim mapping. Because I don't ever want to hit escape that way elsewhere. But again, I'm kind of moving away from that. I'm going to the caps thing, but you kind of just got to think like, is this something that would be useful outside of Vim? And then and then either use the Mac settings, or if you need something more advanced like that triple tap to caps or whatever, then you'd switch to Carabiner or like keyboard firmware or whatever you're doing, right? I just got this new keyboard, so I'm like
that's right.
messing with firmware and everything, right?
Yes, that's interesting too.
But yeah, so like for me, like I would say if there's 2 things that I had to map outside of Vim, it would like by far be the escape key on caps. And I do the similar thing to Mike where I hold escape to get a control. It's just more comfortable, especially on this keyboard, or even on a Mac when you got that function key in the corner. It's kind of weird reaching for the corner. So sometimes you miss it. I know you get used to it, but if you're switching between like a desktop keyboard and then the MacBook keyboard, the control's in a weird spot. So I've kind of always liked having you tap caps for escape, or you hold it for control, and then the arrow keys, right? So just having like once you get used to HJKL arrows, you want them everywhere. So that's another one that I'll do in Carabiner or on my keyboard firmware where I hold a button. I've got a layer button now where I hold it, and then HJKL becomes arrow keys like everywhere in Mac. And that's super handy. Like let's say you're in the browser, you're, wherever you are, you're in a drop down somewhere. You don't have to like reach down for the arrow keys. It's right there under your fingers already. And you're already used to HJKL because you do it all day long.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the two things I would do outside of Vim, but yeah, everything else would probably be in Vim.
That's actually nice too. If you have like a 60% keyboard, whatever, which if you like those little tiny keyboards, which I do, but mine, the one that I bought didn't come with arrow keys on it, which was like, no. And so I tried to do that. I tried to map like a caps lock and then whatever. But what I found is it became really difficult when I wanted to do, like if I wanted to like jump backwards, like if I wanted to press like Control Shift and then arrow left, which like to like jump back and select while I'm jumping back. I couldn't, it had to do like Control Shift and caps lock and then do the arrow. It just did not work. It was not great. And so anyway, if I was using Vim full-time, it probably wouldn't have mattered, but I wasn't. And so it did matter. Anyway, okay. So there's some key binding stuff, and that's good. We're going to be out of time here pretty quick. I want to keep tmux for a different episode. We can come back to that and hit that. One item I did want to ask about real quick here, because this was such a life changer for me. And then maybe we can wrap with this, and then we can come back. Jesse, are you down to come back another show and talk some more about some Vim stuff?
I'd love to.
Yeah. I've got more questions.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been super fun and super educational. I really appreciate you guys have answered so many questions for me already. Multi-cursor
We're all just big
support.
hacks.
Yeah, right. Seriously. Well,
yeah.
I'm the biggest hack. Hey, multi-cursor support. So this was a big deal for me. And I use it on a pretty regular basis. So like, I'm trying to think of a good instance. If I have, let's say I just have a set of like a CSV, and like that's the only way I can get this data. It's just a CSV that somebody dumped to me, and that's just how it is. There's no way for me to get it. And so what I want to do is I want to just say like I want to put a cursor at the end of each one of these lines, and I want to jump back until I get to this column that I'm interested in, and then I want to shift and jump forward and grab. It's just going to be the first name, last name, right? But there's no easy way for me to like search regex and get that thing from that file. I just need to be able to grab all of them at once, copy them, and then delete everything else and then paste them back in. And now I have a list of every first name, last name. And then I want to put a cursor on the end of every line, put a comma, jump back, and then put them into a single line by pressing backspace, right? So now I have a comma separated list of all the names, and now I can do something like a where in search in MySQL or whatever, paste that in, right? What's the multi-cursor story like? What would be the scenario? How would you guys go about doing something like that I just described?
I know that there's a couple of plugins that do multi-cursor. Honestly, I thought I was like you. I thought multi-cursor was the greatest thing since sliced bread when I was using Sublime Text. But there are very few scenarios where I've needed it since moving over to Vim, and I think part of that is just the kind of stuff that I'm doing, where I'm not going through CSVs, but in scenarios where I need to do something that would be multi-cursor, I usually record macros, and I'm like, okay, so I need to, these are the steps so I need to go down, I need to go to the end of the row, I need to go back 3 commas, I need to select the next until the second comma, and then copy that, or do whatever with it. And then I would record that as a macro, and then I would just replay it anytime that I needed it. So if I needed to do it across the whole file or across, 10 records or whatever, I can do that quite easily by using recorded macros. And I've done that quite a bit. There are still some scenarios where I drop out of Vim and go into Sublime Text where I need that kind of
I suppose that's always an option. Right. Yeah, that's always an option, I suppose.
And using the right tools for the right things.
Right. That makes sense.
Still something that I'm not going to rule it out just because I want to stick to Vim for life kind of thing. And
I still do that with right now. It's like PHP Storm. There are things that PHP Storm, like if I have to do that, I always jump over to Sublime. I never do it in PHP Storm. You can't do it.
Yeah.
I still jump to VS Code if I want to run Xdebug, because the Xdebug wrapper in Vim is kind of obtuse, and I just like having those play and step into buttons. So I don't use it a whole ton, but when I do, I'll VS Code. That's pretty much the only thing I open VS Code for, but yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
yeah,
I
right
think
tool for the right job,
macros-
like you said. Yeah.
Yeah. Macros get you a long way with a lot of things. And macros sounds like a scary thing. It's really just a way of recording keystrokes and then replaying them. So I know that I'm going to press J to go down a line. I know I'm going to press $ to go to the end of the line. I know that I'm going to 3 Shift F comma to go back to the third.
What's
comma.
Shift F?
So Shift F searches backwards.
Okay.
Yep. And then I know that I'm going to want to Y to F or Y to F comma to go and grab
yank 2 forward.
Yank 2 forward, and then hit escape, and then I'm going to end the macro. And so then if I press @ and then whatever, so if I go QW, that'll record a macro to the W key. So to replay that, I would then just go @W, and it would replay that sequence of characters. It would go down, it would go to the end of the line, it would search back 3 commas, it would yank, and then you do whatever else you need to do there. And I would do that,
and then you would just do that 20 times or something.
Yeah.
Or what? I mean, because that's not going to record all
to
a buffer or anything, is it?
Well, you can, or you could do, quick fix lists and things like that, and send that kind of stuff out that way. There's a whole bunch of different ways of doing it. But then @ will replay the last macro. So you can just do that as well.
And macros are kind of in a way, multi-cursors on steroids. It is a little bit of a different thought process because the multi-cursors, you can see the changes on all the lines happening at once, versus a macro is you do it on one line first and then play it back on the other lines. It's the same result, but it is. But why I say it's on steroids is because with multi-cursors, you're really limited to basically your text editing and movement just kind of at the native text editor level. Whereas with Vim macros, you can get really clever and you can save your macros into mappings and reuse them in other Vim sessions, or 2 weeks from now, I can play back that macro that I had used 2 weeks ago. If I think it's a handy one, I'll just save it for later. Or you can as you're recording your macro, you can call a function. If you have I have that import real-time facade function I mentioned earlier, that can be part of your playback in your macro. So anytime you play back that macro, it's doing something more than just a little text edit. It might be doing some more a logical thing. Or you can get really crazy and call playback macros in your recorded macros and do the whole exception thing.
Yeah.
It basically, it starts off kind of it fulfills your need for multi-cursor. But then when you need to do something more custom, like a substitution or run a function on something, you're not with with multi-cursor, you can't do that. But with the vet macros, you totally can. So.
Okay. So if I have one more scenario here, I have something with a class of P-BTN, right? And I have 20 of them on the page, but I only need to replace the next 3. What would you do for that? So it's is it a visual select thing? What would you do in that case? So I don't know exactly where they're at. I can't really record a macro. I just know there's the next 3 on the page somewhere. I need to get to those next 3 and I need to change them to RBTN, right? Instead of pink button, I need them changed them to R button, right? Whatever that might be. This terrible example, but it's just what I came up with the top of my head. What's a good way to do that?
So what I usually do, obviously there's probably 5 or 6 or 7 different ways to do this, right? But if you could either visually select one and then paste it in, manually do it 3 times over. But I don't, kind of what I find myself doing more and more these days is highlighting the lines with capital V. So I'm doing line select, highlighting the lines where I want to do a substitution. And then just doing my, a substitution in Vim is where you do S/foo/bar. So you'd replace all foos with bars and you'd hit enter, right? But if I prefix that, you know how regular expressions have flags? So your substitution can have a flag where you can go /G for globally. So it'll do multiple replacements on a line. And then I'll often do /C. So that's confirm. So what I can do is say everywhere in this file, substitute foo for bar /G/C. And as soon as I hit enter, it'll go 1 occurrence at a time, and Vim will ask me at the bottom, will say, are you sure you want to replace this one? Y or N, yes or no. And nice. I can basically just keep going, and as soon as I'm done, I can hit escape and exit out of it.
And can you have it start at the line where you're at? Does global do that, or does it start at the top?
Yep.
It depends on whether you run it on the whole file or whether you just
a selection.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Wow. That makes sense. Yeah. Especially with things like Tailwind, right? Which I know you're a fan of as well, right? Like sometimes when you're not extracted to a component yet and you're just kind of playing with stuff, you end up with these lists of classes of multiple things. At least I do this. And sometimes I need to like, oh, the margin on the tops of these next 3 needs to be 1 instead of 4. I just want to see what that looks like, right? And so I need to quickly be able to like change margin M4 to M1, right? Or vice versa. Or, oh, okay, I need to change it to M2, right? And so to be able to quickly do that during the prototyping phase is really helpful. That's why I asked that one. Okay, cool. Guys, I've got a ton of other questions. Let me give you a little teaser of kind of like what the other questions I have here for next show are. Maybe we had multi-cursor support. How do I get a sidebar of my files? How do I split panes horizontally and vertically? What's the best tool to do that? I'm sure there's a million. You guys might have your own options. Tmux is probably the preferred item of choice there. How do I quickly switch between projects? Global find and global find and replace. How do I like insert a use statement at the top? How do I initialize properties from a constructor? How do I run tests quickly from a particular location, right? So these are some of the things that I use very commonly inside of PHP Storm and would love to be able to have in Vim, and also syntax highlighting for different sort of files. So if I'm in PHP versus if I'm in Blade versus if I'm in Vue versus if I have Tailwind now and I'm wanting to use Tailwind and I want to have those things specifically highlighted, or I wanted to do, some of the stuff with Tailwind class sorting now, or Prettier or some of that stuff. How to integrate those things? Is there like a plugin manager, that sort of stuff, right? And I know you guys are like foaming at the mouth. You're like, wait, let me tell you. We're gonna make you wait. So thanks you guys so much for explaining some of this stuff to me. I feel like I've learned a ton just in the last 55 minutes, and I hope that this is at least helpful to somebody else maybe who's struggling to get started or, get over some of the anxiety about learning a new tool and all of the stuff there is to learn out there. So this has really helped too. Even just the fact of knowing like NeoVim, okay, BramVim, like knowing the difference in like when people say one particular thing, what that even means has been super, super helpful to me. So thanks, Michael. Thanks, Jesse. I appreciate it, guys.
No worries.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Well,
yeah, absolutely.
I think this was fun. We've definitely got at least one more of these lined up. Sounds like you've got a few questions and we can talk, so it'll go for a while. I think it'd be interesting if we could get some other people involved as well. We tried to, it was very last minute, this particular episode, so it was great to have Jesse on. I think, we can speak to some other people out there that are interesting, that have different takes, different people in different sort of places in their Vim journey, in terms of like, I've used it before and I moved away because, or I tried to, but I couldn't stick with it because, or, people like us just saying, why it's great, works from our perspective. But, the thing, I think you asked the question earlier in the Cash Money, Jake, why should I use Vim? And I think the thing that I always come back to, I'm not trying to tell you why you should use it or not use it. I'm always of the perspective that like, this is what works for me and I use it because it works for me, just in the same way that PHP Storm works for you or for others. And,
sure.
and like, I get the question all the time. Anytime I post a screenshot, the first question is always like, what is that? And then when I say it's Vim, they say, why should I use Vim? I'm like, I don't know. Why should you use Vim?
Good question.
You are responsible for telling me why you should use anything. I'm not here being prescriptive or saying like you have to use Vim because I use Vim. I'm just sharing what, this is just what my workflow is, and that's what's worked for me. And I think the additive configuration is always what has been most useful to me, because I open PHP Storm and I just go, there's a lot here, and I'm sure it's very powerful and all its tools are great. And I did use it for a couple of years. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a very useful tool. But for me, Vim does exactly what I need in terms of a daily workflow and nothing more. And I don't need to go and spend time like finding other things or all of the, like, I bet you there's like 80% of the features in PHP Storm you have never used. And that's not to say that no one uses them, but it's saying like there's a whole bunch of stuff there that you just don't need. So
yep.
Yeah, that is always my thought. And like, I just start responding to people that are like, oh, are you stuck in Vim? And that same old like, how do I exit Vim gag? Like 17 years on now, I don't play that game anymore.
And it's not just about like trying to, yeah, like you said, trying to convince people to use it because it's a better tool. It's like, for me, I see it as this like config playground. And it's not that it's not that I'm like spending all my time configuring. It's just that when I need to do something, it's hackable, right? And I've had this Vim config going for years, and I just kind of keep adding. I might not touch it for 6 months, but then I might go nuts for a week and add a bunch of cool little things. Right. And it's not that it's better. There's pros and cons, but Vim is a fun, hackable editor. And if you don't like hacking on your editor and you'd rather hack on a project, then don't use Vim. So, yeah.
There you go. Awesome. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Last chance for final thoughts before I wrap us.
Now, let's do this.
Okay.
Tell us if you like this episode, which is a departure from what we normally do. We'll probably, as I said, we'll definitely do at least one more. We might get 3 or 4. I know that there are people out there in the community that are always interested in what we're doing in the Vim space. So maybe we can get them on and they can pick our brains as well. It'd be interesting to have some different voices.
That'd be fun. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Was this 113, Michael? Is that what it was?
113.
Okay, folks. Show notes for this episode can be found at northmeetsouth.audio/113. Thanks again, Jesse, for coming on. Really appreciate it. One last thing, Jesse, before I leave and ask everybody to give us 5 stars. Where can people find you on Twitter if they want to follow you?
Not sure you want to, but Jesse Leite 85. So LEITE 85.
Okay. Anything you're selling? Anything we should buy of yours? One chance to plug anything?
Not selling anything. Nope.
Okay. All right. Not selling anything. All right. Then 5 stars would be much appreciated in your podcatcher of choice. And until next time, I think that is it, folks. We'll see you next episode talking about all the amazing hackery that we're going to hear about and how I can get a sidebar in Vim with my files.
Mm-hmm. We're going to have the Vim police on standby for that episode, I think. Thanks also to our friends Joe Lennon and workvivo.com for sponsoring us yet again. Or it's an ongoing thing. They just keep sponsoring us, and we thank them whenever we get a chance to, and probably not as often as we should. But they're always linked up in the show notes, so definitely check them out. They're at workvivo.com.
Awesome. Until next time, folks, we'll see you.